Web 2.0.
Innovation.
Trend.
Collaboration.
Software.
Metadata.
Got the world turning as fast as it can? Hear how technology can help, legally speaking, with two of the top legal technology experts, authors, and lawyers, Dennis Kennedy and Tom Mile. Welcome to the Kennedy Mile Report here on the Legal Talk Network.
And welcome to episode 256 of the Kennedy Mile Report. I'm Dennis Kennedy in Ann Arbor.
And I'm Tom Mile in Dallas. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor. We'd like to thank ServeNow, a nationwide network of trusted pre-screened process servers. Work with the most professional process servers who have experience with high-volume serves, embrace technology, and understand the litigation process. Visit servenow.com to learn more.
And we also want to mention that the second edition of our book, The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration Tools and Technologies, is available on Amazon. Everyone agrees that collaboration is essential in today's coronavirus world, but especially remote collaboration. But knowing the right tools will make all the difference. In our last episode, we, as is our tradition on the podcast, got out in front of some things that are happening that have technology implications, and we talked about the impact of COVID-19 and what it might mean for in-person conferences and meetings. We also discussed whether technology might have actually snuck up on us and become a good replacement for travel in many situations. What a difference a few weeks has made in that conversation. In this episode, we take our annual look back at ABA TechShow, which is one of the places that you are actually likely to see Tom and I in the same place at the same time. Tom, what's all on our agenda for this episode?
Well, Dennis, in this edition of the Kennedy Mile Report, we will indeed be looking back at our experiences and learnings from ABA TechShow. In the second segment, we're going to talk about what we think to be is the mixed blessing it is when someone tweets from a presentation that you happen to be giving. And as usual, we'll finish up with our parting shots, that one tip, website, or observation that you can start to use the second that this podcast is over. But first up, ABA Tech Show 2020 is in the books. As many of you know, around this time of year, Dennis and I both attend ABA Tech Show, one of the biggest legal technology conferences for lawyers. We brave the cold in Chicago. Our experience has been that it packs a big punch into 2.5 days, and I would say that this year's conference did not disappoint in that regard. So we wanted to take a look back at it, tell those of you who didn't make it what you might have missed and whether you might want to come along for the ride next year, and maybe some additional thoughts we have around conferences and our current environment. Dennis, any big picture, world-changing takeaways from Tech Show?
Well, it was probably the first one where I felt that hand sanitizer was more important to me than business cards. So I think we were actually on the edge, Tom, of when COVID-19 was having an impact. I sort of felt like we were very close to the line on where there was the impact, but certainly people's behavior was changing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I would also say, Tom, that, and I had this conversation with somebody recently, if Tech Show would have been at its normal time in mid-March, I'm fairly certain it would have been canceled. So
yep.
That was one part of the conference, definitely. But I thought, Tom, for me, great energy, great diversity that I saw, and for me, and I think you as well, we've talked about whether there's a new generation coming in legal tech in terms of the thinkers, the speakers, the writers, and it was really nice for me to start to feel that new generation was arriving and creating their own friendships and all in the same way. Tom, I think that you, me, and many others did in the times that we first started to get to know each other. So that was kind of my overall view. I'll dive a little bit more into the technology, but I thought it was a great show for a number of reasons, but a big part was a sense of the torch starting to be passed to a new generation of legal technologists.
I agree from the standpoint of the speakers, from the faculty. I totally agree with that. I'll be interested to see how the audience changes because I still don't see as many young people, although we'll talk about law students here in a minute. My big takeaway, and actually my big takeaway is a little bit of a quibble, and I'll ask this question. Is it fair to actually call this year's conference Tech Show? Because there was so much more than technology covered. And I know that one of the co-chairs commented that technology is now mainstream and should be integrated into everyday practice. I agree that it should be integrated, but I also wonder, are lawyers ready to have it so integrated that we get away from the how of doing things? Now, I'm not complaining about the content. I thought the content was great. There was tracks on well-being, tracks on innovation, tracks on human skills, other topics that might relate to technology but aren't directly technology. I think all really good content, and as I think you're going to say, something for just about everybody, but it had a different feel in that it wasn't as much helping people learn how to use the technology as in past years. I don't know that that's a bad thing, but that's one big takeaway that I had from it. It was a very different tech show.
Well, I maybe didn't pick up so much of that. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the thing that there is a point in being around technology for lawyers for so many years that you just want to say, hey, look, the stuff is here. We just can't have lawyers pretending that it doesn't exist anymore. So if you say,
but we can't move on from it either. So I mean, it's a tough position to be in. I don't know that I have a solution or an answer to it here, but that's my conundrum.
Yeah, my thought is you just kick people forward. They realize that they're behind and they have to catch up. And if you say, hey, this is all integrated into one thing. I mean, it's an approach. We've kind of held lawyers' hands on technology for a long time, and I just don't know if we've reached a point where that makes sense anymore. I would say that, and you kind of alluded to this, Tom, that for me there was a notion that at Tech Show that reminded me a bit of actually a conversation we had at dinner where people were talking about what they watch on TV these days and things like that. And you realize there's so many options, and for a lot of people, there's not a lot of overlap. And so our experience with entertainment and other things these days is actually quite individual and quite personalized. And so I definitely saw that at a tech show where there would be things that I was paying attention to or sessions I went to, and there just was not a lot of overlap with other people that I was running into. And so that's both good and bad, and it's sort of part of our existence these days where everybody kind of has their own area of interest, and that's what they explore. So the challenge in any event like this is to try to figure out, how you create a combined experience, or you have those discussions when people are kind of have all these different focuses. So, I don't know, Tom, I'm looking at the script and I see I'm supposed to talk about my favorite things, but I've talked for a while. So why don't we switch it up and ask you, like, what were your favorite sessions and learnings?
There were 3 favorites for me in terms of the content that were put on. I think, and I sound a little bit like a broken record on this podcast, but I was sort of flabbergasted by the overwhelming popularity that the sessions on Office 365 had. Every session that I walked into on Office 365 was standing room only. And I think it really shows how much traction the product has and is getting in the legal community. Finally, but I was pleased to see that. The ones that I was intrigued with, and unfortunately I didn't get to spend as much time as I wanted to in either of these places, were on the Friday there was what they call the Doer Untrack, where you actually get together in groups and you actually do things. You actually build things and talk about things. And it's not just listening to someone give a speech. You're actually doing things on different topics. I'm interested to see what the feedback was from those sessions, because I think that has a good prospect for the future of having something more than just your standard conference and listening to people up at a podium talk. I also loved the idea of the Saturday workshops where people actually got to practice on things like marketing using technology to get better search engine results, to use Microsoft Word better, to create your own personal well-being plan, to build a client intake form using Zapier, to conduct your own social media audit, and a whole bunch more. I like that there was that hands-on, and it wasn't just, again, it's kind of upending the idea of a traditional conference and letting people actually do things, which I think is a great move forward. Dennis, what about you? What were your favorites?
Well, it won't surprise you, Tom. I was very interested in the legal education track and the development that's come in the last few years along those lines. So it gives you an idea of what's actually happening in the law schools as law schools kind of put the effort into figuring out how to incorporate technology into legal education. So a lot of good sessions there. I love the exhibit hall, as you know, Tom, even though you won't walk around the exhibit hall with me anymore because you always feel like I end up talking to somebody and forgetting that you're walking along with me.
It's true. You do. It's not worth it.
I'd really liked a session on access to justice and artificial intelligence, which kind of gave an idea of some of the things that people are working on in the A to J area. My favorite part of it was Kristen Sande of Paladin doing a live demo where she did a simple survey of the audience, and we answered questions about, interest, background, that sort of things. And then in real time, she put those together and kind of ranked people in order of most appropriate, I say most matched to a pro bono project. And that was super interesting because the person it identified as the kind of relevant choice was a great person to do this project. And it wouldn't have been necessarily obvious who that person would be. So that gave a great idea of how these kinds of tools could work. And I love it when people have the courage to try something live like that, which I, of course, would never do. And then the other thing for me, I think, is always conversations I have, sort of like the in the hallway conversations. But my favorite one was this funny thing where I was at the concierge desk during the 60 tips sessions, and our friend Ben Shore of Microsoft and Lincoln Mead, who's a former Tech Show chair, were standing with me, and I sort of had like my own parallel 60 tips sessions with the two of them, and I learned all sorts of great stuff from like what bags they were using to apps to Microsoft tips to all sorts of things. So that was super fun for me, but obviously not the experience of most people. I was also happy to see lots of law students present. So Tom, I kind of wanted to get your reaction to this whole new thing of seeing more and more law students at Tech Show.
Well, no, I think that we absolutely need to have more law students at Tech Show, and I'm interested in actually our listeners chiming in on the issue too. There was discussion on social media. There was discussion during the conference about how to get more law students there, and some have suggested let's just make it free for all law students. And having put on the show before, having put on a conference, it's hard to do that because there's a cost to each person, especially if you want them to eat lunch or be able to go to reception, be able to fully partake of the conference. There's a cost to that. And so I know that there were several law students that were there who had been sponsored either by a state bar or by some of the vendors had sponsored law students, which I think are actually terrific ideas. And one of the things that I think we're going to try and work on here, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second, is finding new ways to get law students there, because I think that's where it begins. I think that, to the extent that legal technology is starting to be taught more in law schools, getting out and seeing what the vendors are doing, I think it gives law students even more exposure to it than they would ordinarily get even during a law school class. So I think it's a terrific idea.
And I would say the other thing that was happening was there were a lot of the old law bloggers who were at Tech Show for some reason. So that was super fun to see that Carolyn Elephant, Bob Ambrogi, others who were early pioneers, Jerry Lawson.
Jerry Lawson, yeah.
Kevin O'Keefe, just like a ton of people. You and me, Tom. Even and so that was a lot of fun, and probably I was sort of joking with Tom, it's kind of like the biggest gathering of that first generation of law bloggers I've seen in many years, but it really felt like that. So it's good to see that intermingling of old and new, and like on the law student side, I was just going to add that a number of law schools, including Michigan State, where I teach, also paid for students to attend. So that's becoming another option. But I kind of wanted to step back before we kind of look to the future, Tom, and to reflect on this. And so my question is I was coming home, was like, what is it that I actually learned at Tech Show, or did I learn, and kind of what's the point of these shows? Is it possible in these panel sessions and in these short things, even where you have workshops, to learn enough that it takes you forward? So I usually find that there will be sessions I want to go to, and the speakers will tell me that, no, I won't learn anything, and they will actually discourage me from going, which happened in a couple cases this year. And there's other things where I just need, like I want to do some video things, Google Forms, that sort of stuff. And there were sessions, but it just wasn't quite precise enough to what I needed. And this, I think, kind of addresses what we'll go to next, is what's the future of these types of general conferences when we might have alternatives of YouTube channels and other things to get the specific knowledge that we need when we need it. So I kind of struggle with that because, it's a great experience for me, but it kind of, when I come down to what is it that I actually learned, it was a little hard for me to put my finger on that. I don't know if you have the same sense or had the same sense, Tom.
Well, I think, and we've probably talked about this here before, I think that organizing a conference like this to cover everyone's both level of legal technology experience and their needs is really hard. I was hearing some reviews of some sessions where a couple attendees were saying things like, this was too basic, but I can guarantee you that for the people that it was too basic, there were other people in the room that it was spot on, or maybe it was even complicated for them. And so I think that's part of the challenge is that we still, it's a sad thing to say, we still have lawyers at all phases of their legal technology competency ranges. And I think that's going to stick around for a while. And so I think that for a while, we have to treat these shows as providing a look into what is current in legal technology, give you enough of a taste to say, I need to learn more about this, so that you can go away and find different ways to learn. And you can look at it when you get back. And if you didn't feel like you got enough, you can say, all right, I now know what I need to do. I'm going to go out and find the information to do it. Now, you got to take the initiative to do that. But I tend to agree, you're not going to learn in an hour how to completely do to use styles in Word and create a document that's perfect. But it's going to give you enough of an understanding of what you need to know about that you can learn more when you leave the conference.
So, Tom, let's look to the future. And I think on the podcast you've talked before about what you're doing with the what you're now calling Tech Show Labs, which is the idea of what will happen to ABA Tech Show over the next 5 years, and kind of talk a little bit, in this area, this era of COVID-19, of what's going to happen to in-person events. So maybe you want to start with Tech Show Labs.
For those of you who haven't listened to other podcasts, Tech Show Labs is the idea that the American Bar Association, is being a volunteer organization. When you're putting on an annual conference like this, you have a group of volunteers who are focused solely on putting on a fantastic show for this year. They won't be around 5 years from now, but there'll need to be a show 5 years from now. So Tech Show Labs is designed to help anticipate what the tech show in 5 years is going to look like and start experimenting with new ideas and things to have roll out in fuller form 5 years from now. Things that you can start thinking about now and making plans for that may not be ready for prime time now, but will be the things you need to have thought about then. Now, in terms of where we are in this kind of new world of viruses and lots of conferences being canceled as we speak, I think it's still too early. Is this one of those things that has a problem this year and then sort of calms down to be a yearly season, similar to other illnesses, or is this something totally different? And I'm not sure that we know the answer to that question yet. But I think that part of what the labs are going to have to think about, and conference providers also, is do we have better ways of delivering this content? Are we looking at the virtual conference instead of the live conference? Or at the very least, do we have that as our fallback alternative? Do we have a platform ready to go? Can we pivot and do that if we have to change? There's a huge benefit to having these things in person. But like they showed at South by Southwest, they're losing a ton of money. People are getting laid off. There's a cost and a horrible expense, not just in terms of money, to when you cancel these things. So being able to have something planned otherwise, I think, is going to be something that Tech Show and other groups are going to have to be thinking about in the future. I just don't think that it's sustainable to assume that everything's going to be in person from now on.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've ever seen anything close to the level of cancellations of events that we're seeing now, where basically whole months of events are taken out, or that conferences even 2 months from now are already being canceled. And in some cases, with the financing or the finances of conferences, you just don't know whether they'll come back, because some of them run pretty close to the edge. So I think it is legitimate to say, I think we definitely need to look at web backup. Instead of canceling an event, can we turn it to a web event? So that's something out there. I've always felt that you could run these events parallel with making live streaming or even delayed recordings of sessions available. I'm definitely way in the minority on that, but that's something that I like. And then also I attend webinars on a regular basis, and it's a great way to get content. A lot of times I don't have to be there live. I can download the recording later, listen to it at my leisure. And I really like that approach. I mean, Tom, you guys made fun of me and how I wanted to have my badge at Tech Show have a ribbon that said no handshakes, no hugs. But I think that, when you're in this kind of environment, there are concerns about being in that big a group of people. And I think the technology is there. And we talked in the last episode about Zoom, where the technology has started to become really reliable and really friendly to use. And as the law schools that I'm with and law schools across the country are looking at going to online teaching of classes, which I'm guessing will be in effect by the time potentially even by the time people hear this podcast, there are some options out there. So I don't know, Tom, I always feel like I'm the radical on moving things to web, certainly on a parallel basis, but I don't know if you have reactions to that.
Well, I mean, my first reaction is, being the big Microsoft Teams fan that I am, one of the great features that they have that I haven't been able to use yet is that they have the capability to host live events. And I'd love to try that out. But I think that what's going to make this challenging is, moving to an online platform for conferences can be has the advantages that you talk about, but it takes away the one big advantage of in-person interactivity. We're going back to just listening to people speaking with very little interaction. So where I really think the interesting part is going to be is the innovation that's going to come from this. These types of these types of things generate innovative ideas. And are we going to be able to come up with a way to meet online to make it interactive, to make it feel like you're there in person, but you're not missing out on the personal experience? I think that's the challenge of doing that, and I'm frankly kind of excited to see where this goes.
Well, and I think you're right, Tom. That's where innovation can happen, because we realize that the constraints that we're going to have and what's potentially a drawback is the in-person interaction. But if we focus on that and we say, well, how can we address that? You start to say, well, we can do chat. We can do live chat. We can do surveys so we can get better feedback. We can have people ask questions so the presenters can do it. So every time that we do a webcast, I see the benefit of these tools. We could do sort of like pre-session stuff in groups. We could do like discussions that come afterward, like an ongoing community. So you are limiting the in-person, but there may be some other things, and especially as we move more to video, those may be acceptable trade-offs. So there may be some benefits that are acceptable, and then they make the actual in-person experiences when they happen even better, because more people know each other from what's happened before. So I don't know, Tom, we probably should wrap it up, but I guess that we might as well confess that I think both of us have talked from time to time about whether there should be a Kennedy Mile Report Legal Tech web conference or a Legal Talk Network web conference, and it just seems more and more attractive as something to experiment. So I guess that obviously, Tom, you and I wouldn't do that ourselves, but if people in the audience or even sponsors were interested, I'd say that's an experiment both of you and I might like to run.
Well, I mean, frankly, the Legal Talk Network people are listening to us right now, and I would say that I'd be honored to speak or be part of a web conference that the whole Legal Talk Network faculty of podcast hosts would be part of. I think that'd be fantastic. So sign me up. But right now, we're going to head on to our second segment. But before we do that, let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsor.
Looking for a process server you can trust? ServeNow.com is a nationwide network of local pre-screened process servers. ServeNow works with the most professional process servers in the industry, connecting your firm with process servers who embrace technology, have experience with high-volume serves, and understand the litigation process and rules of properly effectuating service. Find a pre-screened process server today. Visit www.servenow.com.
And now let's get back to the Kennedy Mile Report. I'm Tom Mile.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy. I was doing some live tweeting from the recent Women of Legal Tech Summit, which was the day before Tech Show and was just a fantastic event. So a couple things. So first of all, my hat is off to those who do live tweeting regularly. It's super hard work, and doing it made me notice actually what quotes get tweeted from presentations as I tried to live tweet, and then I saw what other people were doing. So because of the Twitter character limitation, these quotes can often be incomplete, and they're done on the fly, and they can make the speaker look, kind of a little obvious. Sort of, you might see a tweet that says something like, Dennis Kennedy says the world is changing, and you go like, that's not really what I wanted to get captured from what I was saying, and it certainly seems like I'm a master of the obvious. So it got me thinking about what you can do as a speaker when you know you are being live tweeted. And Tom, that actually took me back to something we did as an experiment for a presentation maybe 10 years ago. So where each of us, our slides had a phrase of fewer than 140 characters on it and was intended to be tweetable. And it was an experiment that I think actually worked. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about whether that's a still good tactic. Are there other tactics that people might consider, or should we as presenters just let tweeters say what they want and let the chips fall where they may?
Well, I don't know that I have a ton of great advice here because I think there's a certain point where you can't control what someone is going to say on Twitter, no matter how brilliant your presentation is or how sterling the comments that you make during that presentation. But I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think what you mentioned, that you put enough text on a slide that someone can copy down into a tweet, because oftentimes, like you mentioned, it's hard to live tweet during a presentation. Somebody is struggling so hard both to listen to you and to put it into a tweet. I still don't see how people really have time for that. But I think that's part of the reason why people tend to glom onto a phrase that's familiar to them. It's easy to say the world is changing. But if you have something that they can type directly on your slide, then they can just look at your slide and boom, there it is. You're controlling the narrative at that point. Although I realize, Dennis, that having any text on a slide must cause you a little bit of heartburn. So I don't know that might be the way you choose to go. I think second, this is the harder piece. But as you're thinking about your topic, why not try and say things that don't sound very obvious? I mean, it's 2020. Don't say the cloud is the future for where we're going to store documents. I mean, I was at Tech Show. I heard people at Tech Show say that from the podium. Don't say that. Pretty obvious stuff to say. Even to a novice audience, that's a pretty obvious thing to say. People come to watch you so you can tell them something they don't know or they never thought about. So make sure you put it that way. And that's one way to avoid it. I don't know that I have any better advice on that. Dennis, do you have anything in addition to what I've said?
In a way, I look at it as sometimes it's feedback. It's a feedback loop for you. It's because you see what people decided is important or how they sometimes don't quite get the point that you were making. So that can be helpful as you put your presentations together. I think as you said, you just kind of want to avoid things that are super obvious. And then also when you're expressing complex thoughts, it's pretty easy for those to get kind of misstated. So that's where I think this slide thing can be really good, because especially if somebody can just snap a photo of you and then on your slide it has exactly the point that you want to make, and that's what they tweet, then that's going to be a good thing. But it's it's hard enough doing presentations, right? As you're trying to figure out ways to reach your audience that's there. And then if you say, oh, there's also an online audience, and then there's also a Twitter audience that's going on at the same time, then as a speaker, it becomes more complex. But I think the live tweeting thing is something that a lot of people like to see if they can attend. So what you can, everything that you can do to make it easier for people who are doing that is a good thing. And if you can kind of help, basically edit what they're tweeting in your own way by what you present, I think is potentially a great thing. So now it's time for our parting shots. That one tip, website, or observation you can use the second this podcast ends. Tom, take it away. Oh, wait, we're switching.
We're switching today. This time. You first.
So I had recent experience, to make the long story short. Needed to have a replacement battery in my MacBook. Some more repairs were required, and basically I had to restore a whole everything I had to a new hard drive. And so I was feeling good because I have all these backups, several physical backups, online backups, and I realized the importance of actually testing what you have, because it was not as easy as I thought. It reminded me how long it takes to do this. And then surprisingly to me, on some of the online backups, what I expected would be there, because I uploaded stuff manually in some cases, wasn't there. So it was really a kind of an enlightening experience. And I think the takeaway is that people sometimes said it this way: your backup isn't done until you've tested it. But I think that from time to time, and maybe it's at the beginning of the year, I don't think you have to go overboard on this. It'd just be good to kind of check and make sure that what you have is there. And Tom, I think I told you this, now I don't feel as silly as I once did that I probably have half a dozen different backups, because it helped me out on this one.
Well, and my tip, when I saw that you were going to do that tip, I thought, I have a backup story too, or maybe I should say a lack of backup story, not related to my business or the practice of law. But here's another lesson around backups. I am part of a charity event that we do here in Dallas called Bar None, a bunch of lawyers singing and dancing and making money for charity. We have a great time, June 17th through 20th for those of you who are in Dallas. But we have a website, and I will update the website. I maintain the content on the website, but I don't own the domain, and I don't have the control panel, and I don't have where I can get to the files. But it's really not any of my stuff that I'm doing. And about maybe 8 or 9 months ago, we got an email that said that the host was moving servers, and I didn't get that notification. The other person who owns it got that notification. And then this other person happened to notice that website wasn't there anymore about a month ago. Tom, you want to go take a look? So I went and take a look. And not only is it not there, but none of the files are there. The files are completely gone. And I'm like, well, where's the backup for the website? Well, there's no backup. So when you're thinking about stuff to back up your website as well, because you never know when things can happen. You never know when things can go wrong. Fortunately, we can reconstruct it pretty easily here because we're just 5 or 6 pages. It's just a nonprofit website to advertise a show, and we can do it pretty simply. But your website is who you are as a lawyer and a firm. And if you're not keeping a backup of that and something happens, even inadvertently, you're going to be spending a lot of time and a lot of money putting that all back together. So that wraps it up for this edition of the Kennedy Mile Report. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. You can find show notes for this episode on the Legal Talk Network's page for this podcast episode. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes or on the Legal Talk Network site, where you can find archives of all of our previous podcasts with transcripts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn or leave us a voicemail. Remember, we like voicemails for our B segment. That number is 720-441-6820. So until the next podcast, I'm Tom Mile.
And I'm Dennis Kennedy, and you've been listening to the Kennedy Mile Report, a podcast on legal technology with an internet focus. If you like what you heard today, please rate us in Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the Kennedy Mile Report on the Legal Talk Network.
Thanks for listening to the Kennedy Mile Report. Check out Dennis and Tom's book, The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration Tools and Technologies, Smart Ways to Work Together, from ABA Books or Amazon. And join us every other week for another edition of the Kennedy Mile Report, only on the Legal Talk Network.